let us please welcome the class of 73 and 74. And please let me introduce Mr. Andy Archer.
Good afternoon. Earlier this year, Brian Anderson and I were... Earlier this year... That's it.
You should know how to use the microphone after all these years.
Well, I'm trying. Brian and I were talking about getting a reunion together, all of us who'd worked on the Mi Amigo in 1973 and 1974. And after a lot of planning and emailing and telephoning and seeing people, we're finally here today. I think about 40 or 50 of us, and still continent after all these years. And a bit later, we're having a party. And then Martin asked me if I would mind having a chat with all of our colleagues. So we just met up, and you'll be pleased to know we had nothing to drink. We're dying for a drink. So, Martin, the moment we finish, we want 5 very, very large beers, please. So can I introduce to you, from my left, Robb Eden.
Yeah.
Johnny Jason.
Hello.
Brian Anderson.
Brian.
And Rob de Goede, who you probably better know as Ad Roberts from Radio Monique. Yeah. JJ, I remember you coming to the ship in 1973 for the first time.
Yeah.
Well, just tell us what your impressions were, because I know your face dropped when you saw the Mi Amigo.
Well, I think it's mainly because the first person I met on the quayside was Captain Dick Palmer.
Who was quite a character.
Who was quite a character. He had very, very long hair. I don't know if Dick's here today, but he hasn't got the long hair anymore, but he's still the same old Dick. And of course, I wasn't expecting anything like that at all when we arrived there. So that was a bit of a shock. And of course, coming out to see the boat, I'd been sort of told it was roughly what it was like, but to actually see it in the state it was in then was something quite extraordinary.
Yeah, and I think it's fair enough to say, JJ, that at that time there wasn't much money about, and you had come from a radio station in Australia where you probably paid an awful lot of money.
Yes.
And come the end of the month, after a shift on Caroline, there was very little money.
There was very little money, and as you know, Andy, when we went out, we originally told, I think it was going to be, was it 3 weeks, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off?
Yeah.
And then that, eventually, of course, because of the weather conditions, we spent most of our time tender watching, looking for a tender to take us off, mainly because life on board was quite tough at times, wasn't it?
It was.
You know.
But life on board could be great fun, and I remember one night that Rob, who had just joined Caroline from RNI, we decided to pay a midnight visit to the Mebo, and Rob will tell you the story.
Well, that was a funny story because I think a lot of listeners would have thought that there was no interaction between Caroline and the Mebo because of the Mebo being a very strict organisation as it was, well run, as we know, by John de Mol. Whereas Caroline was Caroline as we know it, or was run on the shoestring. And that night we decided I just left the Mebo because I'd already been offered a job on Radio City in Liverpool. So I decided, right, I might as well spend the summer with having some fun and actually playing the music I wanted to play, because you know on North Sea we were not strictly controlled, but we were allowed to play what we wanted, and I always did. Dutch bands such as Earth and Fire and Kayak and Earring and everybody like that. But on Caroline there was total freedom, so we could play what we wanted, and that's what I have always wanted to do. So that night we decided to go across from the Mebo, from the Mi Amigo to the Mebo. We launched the rubber dinghy, and about halfway across we realised that the dinghy was capsizing, and there was myself, Andy, and Peter Chicago. Really ready for a swim towards the Mebo, which was the closest boat by then. So anyway, we managed to slowly paddle our way towards the Mebo, and Peter Chicago by then was holding on to the actual engine, the motor of this rubber boat. We got ourselves alongside the Mebo, and luckily enough, for once, which is unusual, for once they left the ladders down. So we managed to climb on board, and the ship was deserted. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, Andy, I think, 2 or so. ship was deserted, and we managed to walk all the way down to the studios. And there we met Robin Adcroft, or Robin Banks as he was known on the ship. And Robin turned around and looked at me, and then went back to doing what he was doing. And then he looked again, and he said, "Rob, what are you doing here? You should be over there." And then he saw Andy, and he saw Chicago. And we explained exactly what had happened, and we had to stay on board the Mebo that night because obviously there was no way of getting back. And I think you pointed out, Andy, earlier on that the captain was not amused.
He was pissed off.
He was absolutely pissed off. He was.
Very angry.
Very angry.
And Brian's original responsibility when he came to the Mi Amigo was running the English service of that particular station with another guy called Graham Kay. So would you like to...
Graham Kay. If anybody knows where Graham Kay is or what happened to Graham Kay, I would love to know. I don't think I've ever... No, that's this guy. This is the BBC World Service. No, but Graham Kay was an extraordinary man. I'd love to know what happened to him. And my first job, actually, when I came on the Mi Amigo, was to strip off all of the paint in the toilets and the showers. And I remember spending a fortnight with Steve England chipping the paint off. So that's my first real memory.
That's a good apprenticeship.
Yeah, and then I became Andy's panel operator. So, there's a great...
Even better apprenticeship, as JJ says.
Actually, to pay him his dues, I was with Caroline off-air in 1973. And then in January 74, the phone rang at home in a little village in Kent. And it was Andy asking me if I would come back to be a panel operator. So I owe this man all of my career. So let me publicly say... Thank you for ruining my life.
I think an interesting thing, just move the mic along to Rob, who sort of came on the scene in late 73, was looking at the Caroline organisation from an outsider's point of view. And I think, Rob, it's fair to say that you thought it was slightly crazy.
I knew it was slightly crazy. That was what attracted me in the first place. But I thought it was an organization. I thought it was a radio station with a couple of nutcases. But it wasn't. It was a ship, and it broadcast, but it was completely mayhem, more or less. Yeah. Well, nice, though.
But it interested you enough to go into radio a bit later with Money, of course.
Well, one of the reasons for coming to The Hague, to Caroline House in the first place, was interviewing some disc jockeys, and after setting up a date to do the interviews, the disc jockeys weren't there, of course. So I was stuck with Charlotte and Renee and Elia in the office, waiting for some disc jockeys to turn up. And when they did, after apologizing, of course, we did the interviews, and that was more or less it. And why don't you come back? And I came back loads of times, especially when we had those uncalled for parties. And we used to have a lot of those parties that sort of happened. And when I asked, what is the party for? Oh, well, we don't know. We felt like a party, so want to come? Sure, I did.
We were very lucky because Radio Mi Amigo came along at the end of 1973, and suddenly, from having no money at all, we were in the fortunate position of having a lot of money. And suddenly everything changed, and it became a fairly stable period, I think, in the Caroline history, certainly till the Dutch Marine Offences Act later in 1974. We had food for the first time, I mean, sensible amounts of food, but the problem was our major sponsor was a confection called Susie Waffles, which my dear friend Bill van der Steen knows very well. I can see you haven't been eating many, Bill, because you're still pretty slim. But we used to get fed up with these. Sylvan Tack, who owned Radio Mi Amigo, thought we actually liked them. And he used to send boxes of them out to the ship. And after a while, we got fed up with them, so we used to feed them to the seagulls.
Yes, the boss.
Hey!
Gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
And after a while, even the seagulls turned their beaks up at them. They'd had enough Susie Waffles. But I think it'd be nice to talk about some of the characters on board the ship. Johnny, shall we start with you?
Well,
as a character yourself,
well,
of course.
I mean, I think one of the people we definitely have to mention again is Dick Palmer, because he was not only the captain, but he was an incredible guy, and he had an amazing musical taste. And he used to have a feature on his show called Dick Palmer's. In fact, I think the whole program was called Dick Palmer's Night Trip, if you remember it. Who can forget that? And we all used to gather around in the Caroline studio. Dick used to come in. We'd all been smoky a little bit, a few cigarettes on board, a few drinks, and settling down for a nice evening's entertainment. And Dick would sit there and he'd sort of put on, I don't know, Pink Floyd or something and let it track through for a few tracks. And then he'd come to the end and say, well, what can we say about that hasn't been said in the music? Stuff like that.
And
I must say, come on.
Another funny thing about Dick, of course, when one record had finished,
Yes,
he'd leave it spinning,
that's right.
and the record that was playing was spinning.
There you go.
But after a while, he couldn't work out which
That's right.
which record was on.
Yes.
So that was always fun to watch.
Yes, it was indeed.
Yeah.
Dick was an amazing guy. And of course, also another character was Mickey Mercer, Mickey the cook.
Yes,
Now, Mickey was an American guy, very long hair. Mind you, we all had long hair in those days.
we all had hair in those
We
days.
all had hair in those days, indeed. And Mickey also was, he used to play some incredible stuff, didn't he?
Oh.
I can't actually try to think what sort of music it
J.J.
was.
Cale.
Yeah, J.J. Cale, very laid-back sounds. And we all used to listen to him, didn't he? He used to come on quite early in the morning, sort of late at night, I don't know, 3 o'clock or something, sort of when everyone else was sort of finished.
Yeah.
But it was amazing stuff, wasn't it?
What about you, Rob? Who are your fondest memories of?
In '74, one thing I would say, I think that Andy was a real character solely because he was the ever optimist, and you always are. You always had a smile on your face. You still do. You still do. And that is what you needed on Caroline, because nothing worked, nothing went right. That's why, as Rob said, we always had parties solely, really, to get ourselves through some very difficult times. And I believe that many of the audience wouldn't actually understand just some of the difficulties we had and the dangers. In the days of health and safety and all these wonderful things we have these days, I think health and safety on the Mi Amigo was definitely out the window.
That's right.
We didn't have a lifeboat. I think it was
We
washed
had
over the side of
We
the
had
store.
nothing. I remember, funnily enough, I kept a life jacket from the Mi Amigo solely for personal reasons, just in case I needed it at any point in the future. And I dug it out of my loft some years later, and I realised that there was no buoyancy aid in the life jacket at all. It was a life jacket with like a box in it, but there was no way it would float.
It was a fashion accessory, Rob.
It was. I used to use them on the road shows because they were very, very good. It made it look nice and beefy when you're playing your wooden guitars.
Yes, absolutely.
We were talking earlier about some of the events that happened on the ship, and I remember on one occasion it involved Norman Barrington, and Norman will forgive me if I'm not entirely accurate on this, but one day Norman and I decided to make a cannabis cake, and neither Norman nor I had ever made one before. We knew how much flour to put in, how much sugar, how much chocolate, but not how much cannabis. And we put too much cannabis in.
As usual.
As usual. And we made the cake and put it in the mess room. And we all had a slice. And Captain Meyer and the crew were out on deck, painting and whatever. And they came in for their break. And Captain Meyer, who was always hungry, looked at the table and he said, chocolate cake. And we said, bad chocolate. Sorry, Captain, Norman and I have just made it. It's not good. Don't have any. He said, no, I try some. And Peter Van Dyken and Jaap walked in behind him, and we winked. Yeah. And about 2 hours later, the whole ship came to a complete stop. I think we went off the air. Captain Meyer didn't move from his seat for most of the night, laughing all the time. He didn't know it was the cake, not at the time. But that was, I mean, there's no punchline to this story,
No.
but it was just one of those events that that happened, and the confusion was caused by ourselves. And but it was a very funny day, and I think we were off the air, Norman, for about a day. No.
Who does?
Well, and the other thing that used to happen, of course, is that we also used to have storm tapes out there, because obviously when it was very, very rough, we didn't play records all the way through. We used to have tapes which we used to put on, and these, as far as I can remember, used to be delivered at some stage by a small plane that used to drop them somewhere quite a way off, well, not too far away from the boat. And we then had to get the little dinghy out, in this case I think it was Peter Chicago, and try and go and retrieve these things, which he did. So I think, was it him on his own? I think it was.
Probably was.
Yeah, I think it was Pete.
He was a very brave guy.
He was a brave guy.
Stupid.
Anyway, he went out and got a little. They had a little boat, a little motor with it, and sauntered out to this, picked up all the tapes and so on. Got back to the boat, put all the tapes on board, and we were always looking forward to it, 'cause as well as the tapes, they'd also put in a few new papers and some more supplies and so on. So we were really looking forward to it. Put the engine on board as well. And next minute, we saw him floating off in the dinghy because someone had forgotten to tie him up. And the last thing, we all crowded round to the stern of the boat saying, "Chicago, bye!" And he was sailing off into the distance. And
He arrived in Imunden 2 days later.
That's right. I think they had to call out the RAF, the Coast Guard,
the Coast Guard, yeah.
helicopter to get him back.
Since Radio Caroline, I have worked on many radio stations around the world, but the most remarkable words I have ever heard spoken into a microphone happened at Radio Caroline. We had this amazing woman who's now up there, or probably down there, Samantha Dubois. And she did a program, I think, between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. And after about a day, she went on an enormous ego trip. And she was, well, I suppose we all do. But one night, we had to go off the air early to mend the transmitter. So her program was shortened by 2 hours. And she began her program, as far as I remember, with the words, "Hello, this is Radio Caroline. My name's Samantha Dubois. I'm only with you for an hour today. We're going off the air an hour early, and I'm fucking pissed off about it. But that's the most amazing thing I have ever heard on the radio."
Andy, I think communication.
And his phone's going.
Was it mine? No, it's yours.
I'm afraid I'm busy at the moment. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Actually, whilst Andy's on the phone,
I can just transmit this message. Tone, I'm on at Casa 400, yeah? And Tone Fisser, who was the chief engineer on the Mi Amigo, he is in Dubai, and he's just calling through now to... any message, Tone?
Yeah, please, Mr. Bin Laden says, can I have some money?
Andy's censoring the phone call.
We didn't have mobile phones in 1974. What a great period of time that was in human history.
That's bad news.
He's been captured. Don't lose your head, Tone. We should be playing a commercial while we're here. The only Dutch I remember is echte mosse lekker
Well, listen,
suikerwaffels.
I'll telephone you tomorrow, okay?
We've got to go.
Yeah. Bye. And I'll tell Ronan you still owe him.
Wonderful.
That was Tone Fisser, who played a big part in organising our reunion, but he's had to go to work in Dubai, and he was just ringing to say that he's sorry he can't be here, but wishes all of the crew, the bemanning, all the best wishes. So that's from Tone. I think another great character we've failed to mention is our old friend Graham Gill.
Graham, absolutely.
And I'd like to bring Rob in on this because Rob used to work as Graham's panel operator. And because Graham used to record his program in a a record shop in Amsterdam called Record World.
Record
Robb.
World on the Nieuwezijds Voorburgwal.
Yeah.
Well, Brian actually was recording there as well. Yeah, I know. Working with Graham is something special. Graham speaks some Dutch, not a lot, and he's got this Australian flavour to more or less everything. And being his panel operator means that you take cues from the disc jockey, waiting for him to start talking and all that, and mixing the lot. With Graham, he always used to say, well, I'll give a signal. But it was quite easy for me to discover when the microphone should be open, because then his view would be back at you instead of the parade of people walking by, because he was looking like that all the time, and by the time his face turned toward you, well, that was more or less the time you should open his microphone and play the intro, because that wasn't a problem for Graham.
And Graham, I remember his first program on the Mi Amigo. He asked Norman Barrington to panel op until he got into his first record, and none of us were quite ready for the surprise that came. None more so than Norman, because he said to Norman, "Well, play the music a bit, and then when I tap you on the shoulder, I'll fade it down and do my bit." Yeah. So Norman was expecting the music to come in, tap on the shoulder, and he would say good evening or whatever. But on this occasion, and on every occasion, the music came in, dum, doo, dum, doo, doo, dum, dum, doo, dum, and eventually he touched Norman on the shoulder, so Norman turned the volume down for Graham to speak, but instead of speaking, we got, "Now I come from Australia." And I think Graham's going to sing it for us a wee bit later. But just before we go, we don't want to bore you with our stories, but Johnny and I were arrested together.
We were indeed.
By the police, and you've a much better memory of that event than me.
I certainly remember when we went off the boat. We'd been on there a long, long time, so we were desperately keen to get off. And eventually some little boat pulled alongside, I don't know, well, not alongside, but stood away from the boat a little while. And they started taking pictures of us, which we didn't think anything too amazing. In the meantime, a speedboat or some sort of boat had come to pick us up. And we were so relieved to be off the boat. We were going hello to all these people in the boat, taking photographs of us. And we were so relieved. We got into our boat and headed back towards land. And suddenly we saw some boat heading in the other direction. And someone said, "Crikey, what's that?" And it turned out to be, they said, "It's the police." And our guy said, "Don't worry, lads, we can outrun them." It was like some sort of scene from James Bond. The guy said, "Hang on, lads," and he opened up the throttle, and we surged towards land. In the meantime, of course, they radioed ahead, and there was some sort of destroyer type thing crossed our bows, and these immaculately dressed Essex Coast Guard jumped on board. In the meantime, the guy on our boat had said, "Right, dump everything, lads. If you've got stuff to throw over the side, now's the time to do it." So we got rid of
Cannabis.
that's right, all our stuff on, and there we were. And of course, these people who've been taking photographs of us, far from being fans, turned out to have been people from the Home Office, and we were all arrested.
And I think John Mayer was with us too, who's here today.
Jesse was there as well. Yeah, and then we all had sort of visits from the Home Office, and we ended up eventually in court. Didn't we, Andy?
We did, yes. And I also remember you had a very smart lawyer, Johnny.
I did. I can't remember why, but I must have been very, very stupid in those days. Probably still am. But Ronan suggested that if I pleaded not guilty to this charge, he would make sure he got the best barrister money could buy. So I said, "Okay, Ronan, I'll do it for you." Parents thought I was completely mental. So did most people. And he was very sensible. He went in and said, "Yes, I'm guilty of whatever they were charging us with." And did he get a fine?
Yeah. £500.
£500, quite a steep fine.
A lot of money.
We said not guilty, and they said, "Right, okay, we're going to go down to the Southend Crown Court." And so Ronan, true to his word, hired this guy from the Old Bailey, a guy called James Cumming, he cost Ronan, I think, £1,000 for the day, which in those days was quite a lot, well, it still is, quite a lot of money. And he came down. You can imagine this guy used to operate in the Old Bailey, and he's coming down to this Southend Crown Court. The gallery was packed with Caroline fans. Anyway, to cut a long story short, our guy was so eloquent in the way he spoke that he made mincemeat of the prosecutor.
You've only had one, Johnny.
Sorry, yes. You've been plying me with a few, Andy. And anyway, he eventually said, the judge said, "Right, hold everything," right, and he said to me, said, young man, which I was in those days, you cocked a snook at society and got away with it. Consider yourself lucky. And he said to the chairman of the jury, I direct you to find this man not guilty. And the guy said, they said, yes, not guilty. And the Caroline fans went, yes. So we won the day. It was incredible.
What we're going to do now is just sort of relax and unwind, and I think it's have a few more beers. And I know we can all meet up and have a chat together, because it's probably better to. And it's not just us here. Norman's here, Bob Noakes and Graham Gill, Jesse Mayer, and Peter Dyken and
Andy, can we give a special mention to Tony?
Yeah, we're going to finish up. The really sad part of this, and we want to finish with this, because as you all know, Tony died earlier this year. And he was really looking forward to coming to this. And I know Elia and Rob, who were particularly close to him, were, and myself, we were all saying, well, hang on, Tony, you'll get there. And he was really looking forward to coming. And I think we'd decided to finish off in a sort of tribute with a few Tony stories. Believe me, there are plenty. He was a remarkable man in more ways than one. He was one of the greatest talents I think I ever came across, and one of the biggest fools too. But at the end of the day, he was a lovely man, and I think we've all probably got one Tony story each that we'd like to talk about. Rob, you were there right at the end with Tony.
I've got so many Tony stories to tell, and
you can do two then. Yeah.
I can do two.
Yeah,
okay.
One now and one at the end.
The first one, I think, is very poignant because of us being here today after all these years. Tony and I were working on a compilation album which has just come out, and sadly Tony didn't actually see the finished product. But the thing that astounded me about him, not only whilst we were working on this album, but looking back over the years about him and what he stood for, I think of all the people that we know and knew and are here today and are not here today. I think Tony understood what we were fighting for all those years. Certainly, I believe it was the freedom to promote different types of music, and it's sad that after all that hard graft, we're still here with lots of stations, but all playing the same music. That's sad. But with Tony, his knowledge of music was so vast, and many of you will not know that. Apart from popular music, if you talk to Tony about opera, you talk to Tony about any kinds of music, he always knew something about them. It was the same with books, history. You could have a conversation about anything with him. That's one of the most relevant and poignant factors about him. And it's sad. I said to my wife, Nikki, who's sitting over there, we were both very close to him, but we used to talk to him most days, and there was always something interesting to talk about. And I am sad that I still don't have those conversations with him, because whatever you talked about, whether you were, whether you had a bad day or a good day or whatever, he was always there, and he always had words of wisdom to tell you about that. Going back to the Caroline days, I think one of the most not funny experiences, but it showed Tony's character, which was the Jekyll and Hyde character. He could be such a lovely person, and yet he could be awful. He could be derogatory. He could say horrible things about people, and be very, very difficult. And this story goes back to the days when I was very involved in the running of Caroline in the mid-70s. The roadshows were going on, and Tony was back with Caroline again. And we were all very, very happy to have Tony back. But one of the difficulties we had with Tony was that he had this amazing, huge character. And being out on the ship, sometimes it was very, very difficult for him and others around him to actually sort of work together as a unit. And there was one occasion where we had a phone call, or not a phone call, but a message came through to us on the break, and it said, "Look, Tony's going mad. He's got a knife. He's running around the ship. You're gonna have to do something to get him off." Now, as you know, there's no way you can suddenly. It's not like a taxi ride out there, jump in a cab and go out to the Mi Amigo. But anyway, we arranged a trip from Ramsgate, and luckily enough, it was a very calm day, and we got out there. It was actually after one of the road shows, I think. And because my wife was at the road show, she came out as well, and she had a very special relationship with him. And she sat him down. Everybody said to us, "Look, there's no way Tony is going to come off. No way you can get him off." But I sat talking upstairs in the mess room to everybody else whilst Nicky went downstairs with Tony and had a long chat to him. And the end event was that he came off without any struggle at all. And he actually said to us, "Look, I'm glad you came to take me off. I would have gone mad out here." And that was Tony. That was his character. Next day, back to the other side of Tony, where he was meek and mild and knowledgeable and all those things. He was such a special character, and it's a sad loss for all of us. But I just wish, and I hope, that we all try and instill on ourselves and others what he was saying about music, and that is, it's so important to us, and it's more important now, I think, than ever before. I think the period we're living through is so close to the 60s, where it all started, that we ought to maybe reflect and think, just where we're all going and what we're all doing. That would be nice. That would be good for Tony. Thank you.
I didn't know, sorry. Hope you heard that, Tony. I'm sure he did, actually. In fact, I'm absolutely sure he did. I had cancer 2 years ago, and I'm lucky enough to have survived it so far. Sorry to sort of end on sort of a bad note, but 20 people in this room will be dead within 10 years because you're going to get it too. Your chances are 1 in 3.
Thank you for that, Brian.
Tony influenced me greatly as someone who was a very stupid little boy beginning a career in broadcasting in those days. What Tony did is something that the generation out there today is not doing. He dared to be different in public. And it worries me in broadcasting because I now work in Afghanistan and Kosovo and China and weird countries like that, is that listening to the radio in Holland and especially in Britain, back in the 60s and 70s, we actually wanted to change things. And look what we've created. It's about time that there were other people out there who also dared to be different and dared to change the plastic, insincere, money-grabbing and selfish society that we live in.
Rob, what are your memories of Tony?
Well, Tony was my tutor. He taught me everything I needed to know about radio. And that's nice. I mean, if you have a tutor like that, that's nice. But I think the most important things Tony taught me was life itself. The things he said about life and the reasoning he had for saying them. You could argue with Tony and you probably would lose it on all fronts, and he could tell you exactly why, or he could predict it. So Tony was not only, a famous, good disc jockey that he was, but he was, well, I would say one of the super people the earth ever had. And that sounds very great, but that's the way I mean it. Tony was a good friend.
He was. JJ and I have decided that our stories about Tony are probably not worth transmitting.
Outrageous.
But just to say, we go along with what both Robbs definitely had to say.
We
there.
concur.
Yes, very much.
Absolutely. So. He was a great man and
a brilliant broadcaster.
A very good broadcaster. Yeah. Rob, can you just finish up with the little story about Tony being the voice of Guinness, which I think is a very funny story?
The voice of Guinness?
Yeah. Do you know that?
Not really. I don't know the story well enough
Okay.
to relay that.
No, what he said when you told the nurse he was the voice of Guinness. Wasn't it you that said he
No, no.
Okay.
But I can believe Tony was the voice of Guinness.
Tony, in the 1980s, became the voice of the drink Guinness. He made the commercials for them, and very good they were too. He had the perfect voice, and he drank enough Guinness, of course, so he knew what it was about. And when he was ill in hospital, I thought it was Robb, but it was somebody else, obviously, who said to the nurse, "This is Tony Allen. He is the voice of Guinness." And Tony looked up and he said, "Now I'm the voice of morphine,"
Yeah.
which showed in his, and believe me, I saw Tony not long before he died and spent a wonderful afternoon with him. And he was very weak, but the humor was still there, the smile was still there, and we had a great laugh. So sorry to end on such a, well, at one level, a sort of depressing side, but we all have very fond memories of Tony, and I think for the rest of the afternoon and this evening, I think many of us will be talking about Tony Allen.
Absolutely.
Rest in peace.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're going to circulate.
Yeah.
JJ.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, Andy, when you were talking about the voice, I know exactly what you're talking about. 1 second, please. 1 second.
It was a fabulous. I'll tell you something funny about after you die.
So, Hans has a little gift for you.
Would like to present the first copy of the book. For the fact that you have worked during all those decades. Yeah. And we have done with all for you, of course, but here's the first copy. Enjoy it.
Hans, thank you very much.
The Wet and Wild History of Radio Caroline, 1964 to 2004. You're in it.
Well, that's my reading tonight.
It's all about you, Andy.
Oh, God! Horrible picture.
Hans, thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah.